Hi. So I'm Pindar Van Arman, an AI artist, and I make art with AI, but it's also on the blockchain, and also I use robotics. And I'm here to talk about the future of where I see generative art going, because right now we're at a really interesting inflection point. It's happening right now. So I'm going to tell you where I see it going. So I haven't always been an AI artist. I sort of leveled up back in 2006 when I made my first painting robots. And these robots, they have a brush, and they make marks, and they look at what they did with the mark, and they take photos, and they reflect on what they did, and they use that reflection to decide where to put the next mark, how and where to put it. And it's sort of how a human paints, sort of how I painted. And I got this idea from the artist Paul Klee. In the beginning of the 20th century, he talked about creative feedback loops, and that's how artists made art. And he talked about artists making marks, looking at the mark, and using that mark to decide where to put the next mark over and over again throughout the creation of a painting. And even more detailed, like, and even mid-stroke, like, when I'm taking my brush stroke and I'm drawing a fine line, I'm watching that line be drawn, and I'm twisting the brush, I'm getting feedback from the canvas of what's happening with that paint and using it in real time. Of this, Paul Klee talked about it, he wrote a lot about this, and he said, and one quote I can pull from him, he said, already at the very beginning of the productive act, right after the first motion to create, occurs the first counter motion, the first movement of receptivity. The artist controls whether what they have made is good, that is, the work as human product is both productive and reflective. So it is continuity. It's both productive and reflective. And I always think about that. It's continuity. It doesn't happen one after another. It just happens at the same time. And this is what I really try and get into my AI robots. I try to make them make generative art that is both productive, generative, as well as reflective. Takes into account what it's made. And that's how I'm sort of embodying my own creative process in code and having my robots execute them. So Paul Klee was a major influence on all my art and where I think generative art's going to go in the future. But another major influence is, I skipped that slide, but there's the creative process, is Harold Cohen. We'll go back to that slide so you can see it. But that's the reflective process, or I'm sorry, the creative feedback loops. But another major influence on my art is Harold Cohen. And right after I made my first painting robots, I was really impressed with myself, and I found out about Harold Cohen, who had 30 years before me made his own painting robots. And this led to a cold call, an unexpected friendship, and the closest thing I've ever had to an artistic mentor. In overly long telephone conversations, we would talk about what machine creativity was, what AI art was, and in one particular conversation, we had a disagreement about GANs, a new neural network at the time, generative adversarial networks. And I was trying to tell him, I was like, hey, listen, these are doing something really interesting, something very similar to the imagination. Cohen would have none of it. He always thought that AI was just a filter and wasn't actually doing anything special. And more than once he told me, he's like, there's two kinds of AI artists, Pindar. There's artists that are working from photos, and there's artists that are lying about it. And he wouldn't understand, or he wouldn't agree with me on this, or I couldn't persuade him. And we ended the conversation in disagreement. The whole conversation, he was helping me do a draft for a TEDx talk I had coming up. And I took his suggestions to heart, rewrote the draft a little, and I sent him the draft for approval. And that was our last conversation. I never heard from him again. And this is a bittersweet memory for me because for the longest time, I thought he was finally tired of hearing from me, or like, I thought maybe the argument set him off. But I found out about 6 months later from his assistant that he had passed away. And it's bittersweet because you never know the last time you're going to talk to someone, but also bittersweet because a little relieved that he wasn't upset with me. And there's another reason it's bittersweet, and it's happening right here in New York, is across the street, or across town at the Whitney, he has a major exposition right now as we speak. I'm going Saturday. I just got my tickets. And he was always well respected in the in AI world, and always respected among AI artists, but he never quite broke out into traditional art. He never had the influence I thought he deserved, or the recognition. And it's just interesting. Why now, 8 years after his death, does he finally have something at the Whitney? So, and the answer to me is obvious. It's that now, for the first time, the general public has the vocabulary, context, and like just interaction experience with AI to finally begin understanding AI art that uses AI as a medium. And that's what he was doing. And what is the one thing that that we are starting to understand, and it's something we talked about actually in that final conversation, and it's the idea of emergence. And how can I tell you what he told me about emergence? For him, emergence was, for him, Harold Cohen, rightfully so, thought that all generative art, all of it, including AI art, was deterministic. And that no matter how much variation you programmed in, if you plotted it out on a bell curve, it would all fall into this bell curve of possibilities. Imagine, to visualize that, imagine your favorite crypto art generative project. The typical crypto art generative art project works from a hash with 10 to the 77th possibilities, one with 77 zeros. But even if you were to plot every single variation, they would all fall onto this bell curve. There would be more common art in the middle, and on the outside edges, you'd have the uncommon traits and uncommon trait combinations. So it was everything is on this bell curve of possibility, and this was completely uninteresting to Cohen. He was interested in the stuff that fell off of the bell curve, that wasn't on the bell curve. He was interested in the impossible. He was interested in generative art that escaped algorithmic determinism. And that brings me to what he told me. He told me, he's like, I should always strive for emergence, to get out of that deterministic nature. And Reflection, my recent project that I released about a month ago, is my latest attempt. Now, Reflection is 9 paintings. And these 9 physicals were painted where the robots, using Reflection, picked and made every single aesthetic decision from the first brushstrokes to the finishing touches. And then it recorded 16 layers on the blockchain, and it created 999 generative pieces on the blockchain using a hash. While it was creating the physical, let's see if we can get a video of it going. While it was creating the physical, it reflected on itself. It reflected on every stage and used a cocktail of AI algorithms to decide what to do next and to keep on creating as the image was coming out. It used generative art to make expressive brushstrokes. It used logical AI to do precise marks. You can sort of, as a metaphor, you can sort of imagine it as a battle back and forth between its creative right brain and its logical left brain, back and forth, being receptive and being productive. It's sort of like it's like an embodiment it's an artificial embodiment of my creativity. What it was doing is it would have generative adversarial networks imagine faces. It would have contrast be measured and contrast would be measured and like it would optimize that on the canvas. Diffusion models, the most recent one, would be used to get good detail on the faces. You can sort of imagine this as machine creativity that's broken free from determinism. It's generative art that's touching the very source of creation. So I released Reflection in the 999 pieces, sort of as an exploration of emergence in generative art, and an introduction and also an invitation for people to join me as I continue to experiment with it. I'm going to spend the next year experimenting with this project. I'm going to make all the code open source. I'm going to create frameworks. I'm going to open up and maybe even a platform, show people how to do it. Already, I have one other artist that's taken on to this and is about to do a release using Reflection. And I just see it as the future. And the reason I see it as the future, it's not even the future, it's happening now, is because just now, like I said earlier, are we finally able to understand what's happening with AI art as a general public? We're all using ChatGPT, we're all using Midjourney, and with that, we recognize that artificial creativity or that AI can be creative. During that TEDx talk, I was trying to convince everyone, look, AI is creative, but now I have people coming up to me and telling me, like, when I use DALL-E, I'm making artwork that's way more creative than myself. So this is happening. It's something that I foresee continuing into the future. It's not a matter of if, but when. And I'm looking forward to it, and I'm looking forward to this development in generative art. Thank you very much.